Brian Eric Hurr was a POW at Stalag VIIIB from 1940 until 1945. This is his story. He was born in 1918 in King's Lynn, Norfolk. Before the war, he worked for a dairy and put his love of motorbikes to use by becoming a motorcycle dispatch rider in the 7th Battalion, the Royal Norfolk Regiment. The Sevens were a territorial battalion drawn from the towns and villages of northwest Norfolk, such as King's Lynn and Hunstanton. They were formed in 1939 and arrived in France in January 1940. The 7th were a pioneer battalion attached to the 51st Highland Division and spent their first few months in France making roads and constructing drains. They were originally deployed to the Maginot Line and, when pressured by the German advance, began a withdrawal to Abbeville. The 51st Division was the only complete division left in France, ordered to stay and fight with the French, as Churchill was concerned about Allied unity. Facing relentless German panzer divisions, the 51st withdrew on the 10th of June 1940 to St Valery-en-Caux on the French coast. Led by Major General Victor Fortune, they fought on, but in a chaotic situation and unable to defend their position or secure an evacuation by sea of sufficient scale, Fortune gave the order to surrender on 12th of June 1940. 10,500 men were taken prisoner, including Brian Hurr. Of the 7th Royal Norfolks who arrived in France 6 months earlier, only 31 made it back to England. In the chaos of war, Brian was originally posted missing, but was later reported as a prisoner of war. For Brian and the others, they now faced a long journey to Lamsdorf, where they would see out the war. They were marched for 220 miles until they reached the River Scheldt near Nijmegen, where they were put aboard barges and sailed down the Rhine to Wesel, where cattle trucks on trains took them to Samyn in Poland. They marched the rest of the way. He arrived at Lamsdorf on 15th of July 1940. What we know of his time at Lamsdorf comes from his records and family diaries. He was part of the working parties at E67, an ammunition factory at Mühne-Nicklersdorf, 50 kilometres from Lamsdorf, arriving there on 20th of August 1940. According to other accounts, conditions here were very hard with little food and warmth. He was relocated in July 1941 to E35, a timber mill at Zwittau, 170 kilometres from Lamsdorf. He was a keen boxer, and we believe that he can be seen in the photograph of this activity in the museum at Lamsdorf. We also have some insight into what it was like for his family to know he was a POW through entries in his mother's diaries. We only have 1941, 42 and 43, but they detail his mother, Mrs. Beryl Hurr, writing to him every week, often more than once, knitting socks for him, buying other essential items, including at one point a kit bag, and preparing Red Cross parcels. There are some particularly poignant entries. On the 11th of February 1941, it says, "Learned from the map in the mail where Bry's camp is." On 12th of June, entries for 1941 and 1942, it says, "A year ago today my darling was captured, and 2 years ago my darling." The inside cover of one diary also lists his address and POW number. Brian's mother and father, Beryl and Samuel Hurr, had 3 sons, all of whom were in the armed forces. Brian was a POW, Morris was in the RAF and worked for Special Operations Executive, and Mike was in the Army in India. Sam volunteered as a fire watchman, and Beryl worked extremely hard supporting them all. It is very reassuring to know that Brian was able to be in regular contact with his family, as Beryl's diary records every letter and card that she received from him. In a 3-year period, she sent Brian 173 letters. She received 92 letters and cards from him and sent him 12 Red Cross parcels. We know that correspondence would have kept them all going. We do not know which of the long marches Brian was on, but on 18th of May 1945 he came home to his family. After the war, he married his pre-war girlfriend Joan in 1947, and they had 2 children, David and Barbara. Sadly, the marriage didn't last, but Brian remained very close to his mother and brothers. He never spoke of his time as a POW. Brian died in 1981 at the age of just 63. It is hard not to think that the privations of his POW experience had a bearing on his shortened life. He was a lovely man, always smiling, jolly and generous. He loved telling stories of his days at work as a delivery man and of his colleagues to whom he gave special nicknames. In 2018, Brian's great-niece Helen visited the museum at Lamsdorf in order to pay our respects to Brian and the other men who missed out on so much. She was able to see where Brian would have arrived in the railway carriages and walk the route that he would have been marched along into the camp.
Along the original route into the camp now.
Finally, she was also able to see the museum at Apolla that bears witness to the POWs of Lamsdorf and does so much to keep their memory alive. This film is dedicated to the memory of Brian Eric Hurr, gone but not forgotten.